Guys, as you know, on this podcast, I've done more than one, stinging critique of Liz Cheney. And I'm really happy to welcome to the podcast the woman who's running against her. This is a U.S. congressional candidate in Wyoming. She was born and raised in Wyoming. She's a conservative constitutional attorney. She's endorsed by Trump. Harriet Hageman, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me. It's a real pleasure to have you. You're running against Liz Cheney, who is kind of a known, if somewhat ambiguous character. But let me start by asking about you, because I'm assuming that a lot of people don't know a lot about you. So tell us a little bit about you, why you're running, and how you're going to be different from Liz Cheney if you get into office.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's wonderful to be on your program today. I grew up on a ranch about 100 miles north of Cheyenne. I am Wyoming born and bred, Wyoming born and raised. I come from a very large family. The vast majority of my family still resides in Wyoming. I went to Casper College after high school on a livestock judging scholarship. Then I went to the University of Wyoming and received both my bachelor's degree and my law degree. I graduated in 1989. I am a constitutional attorney. For the last 25 years or so, I have been fighting hard to protect Wyoming, to protect our private property rights, our water rights, and our civil rights. A lot of my cases, or the vast majority of my cases, are against the federal government. I've been pushing back against the EPA, the USDA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, and all of those different types of organizations that really want to turn Wyoming into nothing but a national park. How am I different from Liz Cheney? I think that my background, my history, and the work that I've done provides a very stark contrast between Liz Cheney and I. Liz Cheney is from Virginia. She lives in McLean, Virginia, and really her entire existence is based upon the swamp in Washington, D.C. I actually live out among the people that really matter in this country. I'm a Wyomingite. I'm an American citizen. I'm someone who understands the issues that we're facing, the problems in terms of what this administration is doing to all of us in the United States. And Liz Cheney is just really a creature of Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia.
Harriet, as I think about Liz Cheney, am I right to think that she actually started out with a fairly conservative voting record and has now sort of evolved into a different stance? Is it fair to say that you're someone who was probably warmer or friendlier to Liz Cheney before this kind of evolution, and now she has sort of turned in a different direction, and now you feel like, listen, she's no longer representing Wyoming values at all? Or is it the case that you always thought that she was in the swamp and she was always a bad representative for Wyoming?
No, I think that your first description is very apt for not only me, but the majority of people in Wyoming. I think a lot of us were taken in as to who and what Liz Cheney was. When she first ran for office, she really ran as a Tea Party candidate, as a conservative, as someone who was going to go back and actually plead out what was going on in Washington, D.C. and represent Wyoming, really focus on Wyoming's interests and protecting us. I don't know that it is so much of an evolution on her standpoint. I think that it was just simply the veneer that she presented to us because she knew that's what she needed to say when she was running for office in Wyoming. I think that the more I've learned about Liz Cheney, the more I've learned that, again, she's a creature of Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia. I think an example of that is, number one, the work that she's doing on the January 6th Commission and her vote to impeach President Trump. But she started attacking President Trump long before the election in November of 2020. Keep that in mind. And so people in Wyoming really started questioning who and what she was and what her intent was, what her agenda was, even before the November election. But as my brother says, the reason we have elections every 2 years is to hold people accountable. And I'm not only going to hold her accountable by voting against her, I'm holding her accountable by running against her. We have the right to do that. She's not representing Wyoming. She's representing her own agenda. She's not even on the Natural Resource Committee for Congress, which is one of the very first times in history, which demonstrates that she doesn't have our best interests at heart. She has her best interests at heart.
I mean, I see that she's getting praised by Kamala Harris. The Lincoln Project, which has its own agenda, is putting money into her campaign. I read an interesting article that says that when she's communicating with her constituents, she leaves out probably the thing that she's most famous for, which is all her aggressive performances on the January 6th committee. She's basically the front person for Nancy Pelosi and sort of doing Pelosi's dirty work, but none of this is apparent if you look at her communications with her constituents back home. So do you think that what we're dealing with here is just a blatant two-facedness, and she's kind of hoping that her constituents are too dumb to figure out that there she is on C-SPAN and there she is in the national news, and she's the darling of the Washington Post, and the left is praising her, so she obviously is doing something that is advancing their cause, isn't she?
Well, absolutely. I'll start with what you said at the very end. There's no question that the work that she's doing with Nancy Pelosi and the January 6th Commission is designed, it's specifically designed to deflect attention from the failures of the Biden administration and to deflect attention from the radical leftists that are running our government right now. So that's number one. Number two, she is being praised by folks such as Kamala Harris and Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff is one of the most dishonest people we've ever had in government. And the fact that Liz Cheney has aligned herself with Adam Schiff is really terribly embarrassing to the folks in the state of Wyoming. As far as being two-faced, it is rather interesting because I receive her weekly newsletter and I receive her information, and they're full of all kinds of glowing information where she zoomed into a meeting in, somewhere in Wyoming, or she met with some folks in her office in Washington, D.C. But for the longest time, she never, ever mentioned the fact that she was on the January 6th Commission. But as you point out, it's really the only work she's doing at this point. To my knowledge, there isn't anything else that Liz Cheney is doing. Well, actually, I will take that back. Last September, on the Armed Services Committee where she serves, she took time to praise General Miley and attack her fellow Republicans for not being obsequious enough to General Miley and what he's done. This was shortly after the disastrous pullout in Afghanistan and the loss of 13 of our own military, as well as the bombing of a family of 10. She actually took time to praise him and talk about what a great public servant he has been, which I disagree with. But she doesn't talk about her work on the January 6th Commission. But also keep in mind, she really doesn't come back to Wyoming either. So she doesn't probably have a lot of opportunities to come to Wyoming, to Casper or Cheyenne or Douglas or Newcastle or Rock Springs and actually really talk about the work that she's doing. And that's by design. She's not representing Wyoming right now, and we need to replace her.
Do you think, Harriet, that this is a winnable race for you? I say that because, by and large, it's difficult normally to unseat an incumbent. But second of all, this is not any incumbent. This is an incumbent with a big name. I remember when I was at the American Enterprise Institute, her dad was a regular over at AEI. I've been to a number of events with him. I actually did like Dick Cheney in the old days. So she comes from a prominent family. She's the incumbent. Is there enough momentum with Trump's support and your credentials and the money you're raising to be able to win this one?
Absolutely. There's no question in my mind. Now, there's no question that Liz Cheney is going to raise massive amounts of money. She already has. As you pointed out, she's raising money from folks like from the Lincoln Project. And people who want to donate to me and help me out, they can go to HagemanForWyoming.com. And it's very important that we be able to take her head on in that arena. But the fact is, I'm the one traveling the state of Wyoming. Between September 20th and December 17th, I visited all 23 counties in Wyoming, some of them several times, and I drove over 9,000 miles in the state of Wyoming during that 3-month period. Liz Cheney may fly in and out, but she is not meeting with our constituency. Over the last couple of days, I've traveled another 1,000 miles meeting with people from various places around the state, and I will continue to do that over the next 8 months. The difference between Liz Cheney and I is I live in Wyoming, I'm from Wyoming, I have Wyoming values, and I've spent my professional career protecting Wyoming. She is someone who comes from Northern Virginia. She is the part of the swamp, and the people in Wyoming are really tired of being represented by someone who does not represent our interests and is not carrying out and working on the issues that are important to us. Again, an open border, inflation, these terrible vaccine mandates that we're seeing come out of this government, the unconstitutional overreach. So She's absolutely beatable, no question in my mind. Again, people can go to HagemanForWyoming.com. But the fact is that I'm excited about this race, and people in Wyoming are excited to replace Liz Cheney.
Harriet, I wish you all the best and I want to thank you for coming on the podcast.